about advertisements nowadays telling women that you can be sexy. This debate is about dealing with advertisements that tell women you have to be sexy. That is why we think that the debate comes down to who and what shapes social norms and how do we deal with norms that discriminate people based on gender. On this will be the direct extension and unique contribution coming from the closing government today. But before I go on, let's deal with some of the issues that came from the opening opposition. Now they talked about the issue of how subjective values are all there in advertisement. We tell you that some subjective values are inherently bad, right? They talked about animals. Well, we don't have advertisements that tell people that the advertisements that show how these animals are killed, right? We think the same rhetoric exists with sexism, right? We think that it's not just about individuals being portrayed hot and sexy. It's about those images making individuals build a culture and systematic stereotypes and discrimination that you have to behave that way, that you have to be like that, and if you're not like that, then you have a problem, right? They talked about the issue of check and balance, why advertisements will change. But we tell you that once advertisements gain popularity, that shapes the social trend, and it makes it impossible for advertisement companies to do something that's extremely radical or extremely different, right? And we think that itself actually make it very difficult for consumers as well to distinguish between what is shown on TV and what is shown in reality, right? They talked about the issue of how women can actually self-actualize. Mr. Speaker, we want to ask you, is this self-actualization really the way that all women in this world want to be, actualized into? We think that these kind of ways and the directions provided by the society today is a coerced way, right? We think that mainly because young women and these ordinary people, right, are not really in that process and in part of that voluntarily changing the norm and shaping the norm. It is the dominant people and the majority of people who believe that this is the right. And we think that in this case, mostly comes down to dominant male and dominant male desire. And we say that women's and female desire really don't stand in many of the cases in reality today. They talked about the issue of consumers' pleasure. Now, Mr. Speaker, we tell you that the fact that these consumers in general don't feel bad about seeing this kind of provocative sexist imagery and enjoy it itself is a problem, because we tell you that this is the way that gender norms are being shaped nowadays, right? And and they told us how societal norms have changed. We don't know what kind of changes you're referring to. Are you referring to women being suddenly like CEO of all the countries, right? We think that we don't think that this is changing in the way that women want, and even though it is changing, we don't think that these aspects are not really the core target of what advertisements want their consumers to see, right? And we think that it is highly problematic when individuals have to be faced with these advertisements and with these images on everyday life, because that is the very target of advertisement. It really tackles you and stimulates you on the everyday process that you see, right? So we think that this debate is about norms, because it is not just about advertisements telling people that women are hot. We think that on top of that there comes the discrimination that women should behave that way, the stereotypes that if you're not, and not just women but men as well, that those genders have to behave on that way, and as we see, on top of sexuality and sexual desire is shaped the gender norms are shaped on top of that, right? And we think that this norm is what we want to change and we want to ban. So as a closing government, we're going to first talk about what is this norm and why is this inherently bad, and secondly, I'm going to give you deeper analysis to who changed these norms and what they do to the behaviors of individuals, and I'm going to thirdly talk about why these norms have to change and why banning is the only mechanism, because that is sticking to the spirit of the motion today, right? So moving on to my extension. Right? We think that sexism in advertisement is inherently harmful to our society, right? Because as I've given you throughout my rebuttal, right? This is not about just provocative images, but extending to that, we think that this is about how people should behave in that certain way. For instance, if you see an advertisement of sexy women with shiny legs, right? We think that all women are stimulated in a way that they should shave, right? Because no one tells women that you shouldn't shave, but it is the advertisements that make, and the consumers see those kind of advertisements believing that it is extremely normal for all women to shave. That is why we don't really see ordinary 20 young women not shaving their armpit. We think that these kind of behaviors, it's not funny, because these kind of behavior actually discriminate you based on your gender, right? Because women are given with that duty to behave that way, while men are not given that duty of behaving that. And when we're talking about these kind of gender norms, we think that it is usually the women who are the target of that kind of demand and the kind of desire provided by the man. Yes?
According to your logic, you're not making issue of everything. Why sex is only exceptional?
We say that sex, okay, this debate is not about sex. This debate is about sexism. And we think that sexism is about discriminating people based on gender, gender that you do not choose, right? And we think that that is the core part of people's identity, the core part of people, how people behave, and how people live in their life. And we think that that itself is a critical thing and critical matters to every individual, universal to the society. We think that it goes on top of every other subjective values that you're trying to characterize in this debate, Mr. Speaker. So, no thank you. So, we tell you about like who make and change the norms. We tell you that it's not really the ordinary like people, the 80% of people, like just ordinary young women who really change those norms, right? We think that the people who actively utilize these norms and who actively shape these norms are the ones who are on that dominant, dominant desire. And we think that in this case, this is usually the males. And we think that the advertisements are actually utilizing that and only listening to that, right? And we think that what happens is they really discriminate and restrict the behaviors of ordinary men and women, that it's good for female to be more passive and sexy and provocative, while male should be very active and masculine and whatnot, right? We talk about these continuous messages that these advertisements are telling us based on gender, right? But how do these norms change? Madam Speaker, we think that that is a critical issue that should be discussed in this debate, because we don't think that norms disappear out of nowhere. We cannot simply wait and say that these norms are going to be changed and that's going to be reflected in advertisement. We tell you that there is a need for a government to actively step in to incentivize the advertisement companies to change this and interfere this, right? Because we think that when majority of people believe in it, and majority of people are in the stake to change these norms, they won't really change them. They won't really be incentivized to actually change the norm, right? Just like when there's 99% of people saying yes, this is right, it's very hard to know, like 1% of person saying no and making that real different change. And we think that this has already happened traditionally when it comes to like racism, right? To deal with racism, well, like what governments do is sometimes interfere into clothing companies to put racial quota on the models that they use, so that it's not only the white, beautiful females that are being represented, but also, people from different ethnicity being represented, right? So, Mr. Speaker, I think that this debate should really focus on the issue of norms and why we should ban the norms that should not exist, should be changed in our society. For these reasons, Team Stoltenberg is happy to propose.
Okay, I thank the government member for her speech, and now invite the opposition member to
Mr. Speaker, all we've heard from the government side is that gender images are bad. Basically all they've done today is to tell that we shouldn't portray women in a certain way. What I'm going to tell you is that we are actually limiting an individual's choice to actually empower themselves in a way. I'm going to tell you how this actually infringes the feminist movement, and before I go on to my extensions, I'm going to go through actually what has happened so far in the debate. So first of all, let's go to the opening government. We think that actually they have two goals. Basically, women, they say that women are objectified, and they have this worry about not being able to opt out. First of all, we think that there's a slight problem-solution mismatch. They're only talking about advertising when these images are persistently present everywhere we look. I'm not sure why we're not talking about music, why we're not talking about television. These are constantly around us. But what they don't realize is that we actually have limitations. We are not allowed to show whatever we want to show on TV. Certain limitations exist, and they are there to actually prove that people can actually show what they can be actually protected from certain things. We are protecting our children with age limitations. What they are so worried about is that their children will be actually traumatized when they see things. We actually see that we can't put everything on the streets. We can't put any type of advertising on the streets. We actually have a limitation. The same goes for what can we show on TV and at what time. for this reason, we actually don't think that children will be that traumatized if their parents take good care of them. Second of all, we don't think that this opting in, opting out works just in case of advertisement. They're worried about if you're watching your favorite TV show, you can't actually turn it off because you have to wait until the commercials end. But we see all these things happening also in the TV show itself. But we don't think that this is necessarily a bad thing, Mr. Speaker, which is what I'm going to prove to you in my substantives. So finally, they have told us that companies have no choice because for some reason they believe that this is the only way of advertising. Frankly, Mr. Speaker, let's take a look at Coca-Cola. I'm pretty sure they have a polar bear on their commercials. I'm not sure how sexist that is, and they are one of the world's most productive companies. So we don't actually see how this works. So what we see that the government side is trying to do is that they are somehow trying to implement a fairly gender-blind society, and we don't think actually that this is a very good thing. We actually believe that we need to emphasize these women's right to actually promote themselves as they wish. So this is what we are promoting. So first of all, let's remember that there are a variety of commercials. Not all commercials are these types of sexism that they talk of, where women are portrayed as these beautiful creatures. You have also the ones that they are not the same. We have a variety, and this is why we actually have these individual rights protected. We can actually say that women are allowed to show themselves as they wish to portray. There's always a limit, Mr. Speaker, and this is what we are saying. So finally, they also think that somehow people are very irrational to believe everything commercials say, that if you buy a certain type of beer, you'll get the certain type of girl. We don't actually think that people are all that irrational, Mr. Speaker. We don't actually see that everybody will think that way. Yes, ma'am.
The very premise of advertisement is that consumers are irrational when they see that stimulating images.
Yes, but we don't actually see that everybody is like that. Yes, some people do buy the exact image, but that is a very small portion of the people. We actually see that yes, there are commercials that work, but we don't necessarily think that it's also necessarily also bad. So let's move on to what we're saying. We actually think that when we're not so worried about all these stereotypes that the government side is very worried about. We think that this is actually advancing women's rights through a type of feminism. We actually believe that women are allowed to portray themselves in this way if it is their own choice. We are not coercing women to be this, no thank you. We're not actually saying that women, you have to actually put yourself into this commercial or you have to be this way. That is why we say that because there is a variety of commercials, this kind of system does not work. We actually think that this is a type of lipstick feminism where women are actually emphasizing their own beauty, that are empowering themselves by actually being beautiful in this commercial and being these things that they tell you are being objectified. Maybe it's just that the opening government is all men, but we don't actually think that this is simply true. We actually believe that it is this women's choice to be portrayed in this manner, and we believe that this is also their way, no thank you. This is also their way of actually advancing their own rights, and I'm going to tell you how this happens in my substance. So what we believe is that we actually are empowering this way women as women, Mr. Speaker. We are not attributing them to be this gender-blind thing, but we are actually saying that they are women and they are allowed to be who they wish to be, Mr. Speaker. We believe that in this society, we cannot actually omit this idea that women are a different body type and they are a different type of creature than men necessarily are. We actually believe, no thank you, that we actually believe that if we attribute them to be also these sexual creatures, they can be empowered by that way. We actually think that in this case we are emphasizing their confidence. Mr. Speaker, it's an unfortunate fact sometimes, but women are empowered by the fact that men feel attracted to them. And we actually believe that in this case, when we advance their confidence, Mr. Speaker, we can also, no thank you, we can also emphasize their also self-actualization in the society. We believe that a confident person will also always strive for further in the society. We believe that these are the people that can advance in the society because they trust in themselves. No, thank you. And they actually believe that they can advance in the society. They believe that they can do things because they feel confident about themselves. Yes, sir.
Basically, even if it promotes feminism or a specific value or self-actualize or whatnot, if people don't want to see that and they want to opt out of it, you're not giving them a choice to begin with.
Why are we talking only about these images as an opting out? I see a lot of things on TV that I do not want to see. I see a lot of things in commercials that I really do not want to see. I don't want to see the amounts of violence. I don't want to see the amounts of drinking. I don't want to see all these things, but I am not allowed to opt out. Why should this be any different, especially when we are telling you that this is women's way, certain certain individual's way of empowering themselves. We don't see why is this so different. We believe that in this case, we are disrespecting an individual and their choice and their way of empowering themselves in the society. And we do not think this is justified in this case when, first of all, we do not have a general opting out of everything. I cannot opt out of everything, Mr. Speaker, so why should I be able to opt out from something that empowers my own gender, Mr. Speaker? We believe that in this case, when we actually ban these images that they are saying are very stereotypical and they objectify women, we're actually limiting these women's way of actually empowering themselves, which is why we are proud to oppose this motion.
Thank the opposition member for her speech, and to conclude the government bench, I invite the government whip.
Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, rather than why people have the right to opt out or parental rights, we think this debate, the core of this debate really came down to the issue of what is a social norm that these kind of advertisements create, how do they create it, how do they push them into forced choices and forced way of thinking, and how the banning of these kind of advertisements is the only way as the companies have no natural incentive to tackle this problem, which nobody even realizes in the status quo. We think stopping social norms is the main issue of the debate. So basically when opposition questioned about company rights, basically the simple answer came from us that because when there is something wrong with social norm, then the government does have to take an active role in order to intervene into these kind of cases, just as we have banned, racist advertisements, just as we impose quotas of different models of different ethnicity in advertisement. We think this kind of government intervention is needed into reshaping the social norms of the society, which we think is inherently bad at the end of the day. So basically the unique contribution that only came from the opposing government is of how we actually characterize the heuristics of the advertisement of pushing social norms through one-sided image and coercing these young women through the use of celebrities into thinking that these are the things that they really want. We actually think that these kind of grounds of thinking what they want has to be provided in an equal level, whereas in the status quo we only have one-sided part of information going on. We also talked about how especially banning practically solve these kind of problem at the end of the day. So basically that leads us into two clashes and two main issues of today's debate. Firstly, is self-actualization and open discourse really achieved under the status quo, or do we need change? Secondly, I'm going to deal with the issue why only banning can be, achieve this kind of goal at the end of the day. No, thank you. So let's go on to the first issue before I go on opening.
So as I said in my speech, companies have the nature to differentiate themselves against each other. That's why in Japan we see commercials in which women become CEOs or businesswomen. How do you engage on this point?
The point is, the companies are not differentiating themselves. We told you that there's a social norm that they want to characterize women in sex as somebody who's passive, as somebody who can be getting that they want. So rather than them differentiating themselves, we already characterize the advertisements that they function in a way that they want to adhere to the social norms, as that's the main demand that comes from the society. They're not differentiating themselves, Madam Speaker. We're saying that no differentiation in characterizing what women want is the main problem of today's debate. So let's go on to our extensions and our contributed points regarding the inherent character of sexism. Basically, we think regarding this issue, we needed to characterize whether this kind of norm does good for the society or not. Now, we firstly think that it's not good just because it's provocative, but also in advertisement portraying sex or any other gender roles, we think it's bad because basically it forms social norms and it gives people a constant exposure of one-sided information of what kind of women we have to be, what kind of males we have to be at the end of the day. Now, the first argument that comes from the opposition, both the opening and the closing, is basically that open discourse is important, and there might be some people thinking that maybe I should be taking more of an active role, right? But basically, Madam Speaker, due to the demand, due to the company rights, they adhere to more majority social norm, saying actually to want to see these kind of women as passive. So actually, if it's prevalent already in the society that people want women to act this way and men to actually act that way, then basically that's how the advertisements are formed. Why? Because basically advertisements are made in order to coerce people into
purchasing certain product, which also means that they want to relate to each and every individual's lives. What it means is basically that because advertisement is so close to the real life environment, it coerces people into thinking that maybe this is the right way to go. Okay? But not just that, we actually think that this doesn't equalize into self-actualization of women. Why? Because basically, firstly, we actually think that they only show one-sided role of women. That image, and we don't think that that's the image that women want to show themselves. And, women want to show themselves. Why? Because if I'm the woman who actively want to engage in sex, basically what we see, the images that I see in the in advertisements and commercials are basically images that get picked up by men. And I think because this is a prevalent social norm, basically these are going to be the advertisements that are going to be created. And because these are the only ones that actually get to be on the television from the first place, basically these kind of self-actualization of women is actually not going to be, reflected into these kind of media from the first place. Therefore, like your idea and your women are not going to be reflected. But secondly, we actually think that these kind of heuristics, these kind of things actually push young women and force more young women into thinking that they want to be these kind of passive women at the end of the day, which nicely leads on to my second part, why only through banning it can be achieved. Now their case, both of the opposition cases, based on the fact that people are rational enough because they can distinguish advertisements from reality. We basically think that this is wrong because firstly, the premise of the advertisements means that this is under the premise that people are going to believe in it and you're going to make people purchase it. Secondly, people cannot distinguish between reality because advertisements once again go for relating with their images to reality, and they actually have real life situations, so people actually know how to apply the product and buy the product. But thirdly, we have made a clear contribution by actually telling you how heuristics work in advertisements or how they target young women. Because they use celebrities that young women idolize, and because they shape the mindsets of young women into wanting to act that way, that they like the celebrity that they idolize, basically their mindset is now coerced into thinking that maybe I have a certain set of role in order to be cool like that celebrity. That also actually coerces and sets a social norm of not just men but to women, and it actually coerces them in a way that they actually need to act in a certain way. Now, why can only banning can achieve it? Basically, because people are enjoying these kind of advertisements at the end of the day, right? Certain set of freedom and certain set of people like to write for them to enjoy the product, freedom. We also told you through our rebuttals from members that this is also part of the problem, right? This was another unique contribution. Basically, because the social norm is shaped in towards the way that we actually enjoy these kind of women are being passive and males are being active, we actually means that the society cannot make right decisions by themselves already. And plus, the companies have no will to change it because they need to adhere to the demands of the society. In these kind of cases, we think the only way for the government to solve this problem is by banning it, by actively, intervening in this, right? That's why in every cases of discrimination like racism or like ethnicities, we need government intervention because the nature of free market doesn't allow room for these kind of rights to stand from the very first place. We think the trap of democracy is that once a certain set of social norms are formed, basically these kind of social norms can never be changed unless the minority gains like a really big power, right? And we think the only way to equalize these kind of discrimination going on in the society is basically, again, the government intervening to create this kind of image that the society is. Now the commercials tell us that women need to be pretty, women need to be passive and sex, and give us all the gender roles. It doesn't have to be that way. We stand for women. That's why Team Sonri stands as a feminist.
Awkward.
I thank the government whip for her speech, and I invite the opposition whip to conclude the grand final.
Mr. Speaker, I believe the point that is coming out from the government side is very contradicting. Think about the case in Korea, where the country that we're living in. In Korea, they restrict sexism. It is very patriarchal, if that's how you say it. However, in the case of West and case of liberal societies, right, in case of liberal societies, they're not as restricting such sexism as in Korea, right? However, we see that in Western societies that the women's rights are even more emphasized. And the case that the government side is coming up with of how by banning such sexist advertisement, it is somehow magically going to exacerbate the women's right. Seeing the case of Western and liberalist societies, we see that women's rights are even more emphasized. And having said that, I believe the point about women's rights does not stand in the government's case. Mr. Speaker, before moving on to the substantive points, I would like to first move on to some rebuttals and some extensions from the previous speakers. First of all, I'd like to say that in the case of distinguishing between pornography and advertisement, I believe there needs to be a clear distinction, because in case of pornography and advertisement, there is different purpose. In case of pornography, right, there is a purpose of actually entertaining men or women sexually. However, in case of advertisement, the advertisement are there to actually promote these consumers to buy the product. They're not actually They're not actually emphasizing these. They're not actually giving these consumers the nudge that because these women or men are very hot, you should buy this product. That is not the premise of these commercials, Mr. Speaker. And secondly, in case of advertising and pornography, right, there's a level of sexuality, sexual expression that also leads to child education and whatnot. Because in case of pornography, you don't teach child with pornography when learning about sexual things, right? That is because it is too extreme. However, the opening opposition has told you that because in case of advertising, it can actually be educational, because there is a limitation of actually showing such sexual ideas and ideologies that is actually exposed in these advertisements, and that is why I believe that can actually work as an educational purpose.
Sir.
Later. Also, I would like to tell you that woman's right, even the man's right, it is their right to actually conceive a message. It is their right to conceive a different message when watching advertisements. If they want to receive the message that has been shown in the advertisement to be very sexual, it is their right to conceive it that way. If they want to actually emphasize the product, if they want to highlight the product that has been advertising, it is their choice to do it. However, it seems to be the government is not actually engaging upon that point. Yes, so.
If your promotion of those kind of things actually let these men have a reason to objectify these women, actually, don't you think that's harming your own principles in terms of supporting feminism and whatnot?
I believe that it is not it is actually supporting feminism, because a member came out and said such advertising it does not devalue the woman's right. It actually values the woman's right, because we are telling you that by showing such sexual appearances actually emphasizes that first of all, women are actually capable of actually showing themselves as sexually capable or not, and they can actually be attracted by this man. But also we tell you that because of this beauty, it may actually emphasize their capability of actually contributing to society. Mr. Speaker, now moving on to re-emphasizing what our member have told you. Our member have told you that because there are a variety of commercials, there are always multiple choices that we can actually make, Mr. Speaker. Because there are variety. When let's say Samsung is advertising their TVs, right? We not only see that advertising Samsung TV with sexual premise. We also see advertisements by showing the clarity of the TV appearances, right? There are distinguished. They can actually be distinguished, and just because by the fact that it may actually diminish the woman's right, I believe that cannot be a justification of banning such commercial, and because these commercial companies, they actually have their right to actually show whatever they want, because these commercial also interest groups who want to target these men or women who may actually be attracted to those appearances that has been shown in these commercials, right? And also, what we tell you is that it is disrespect of an individual's choice. We tell you that because of the general consensus, because there is no general consensus of what message can be actually extracted from this advertisement, we cannot ban those commercials just by assuming that these people were going to get such messages, which may not be the case in reality, Mr. Speaker. And what I've told you, what the opposition side have told you in this debate, we have told you that there are choices and freedom of choice that these, not only the actors in the commercials, but also the consumers who watch such advertisements, there are rights for them to actually conceive what message or whatnot from those advertisements, right? And we have also told you that it is actually enforcing the feminism movement. It is actually giving more rights. It is actually emphasizing the woman's right by showing such imageries in advertisement. And having said that, I'm extremely proud to